Hello and welcome back to the Fantasy Playmakers. What's up, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be talking about 5 players who are shooting up my rest of season rankings. So these are players who have drastically outperformed their ADP so far in the season. And so I'm going to talk about where they were drafted, where I had them ranked going into the season, then break down their production, talk about whether or not it's sustainable throughout the rest of the season, and then how I value them moving forward. So while you guys are watching this, if you're enjoying the content, please just hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. It could be any fantasy football question. I will make sure to respond to every single comment. But let's get right into the video. And the first player I'm going to talk about is DeAndre Swift. He was my running back 17 going into the season, and I had him as a late 3rd round pick. He was being drafted overall as a mid 4th round pick. That's really not because I had him ranked higher than consensus. It's more so just that in my rankings, I go very running back heavy. So I was pretty, in line with the rest of the fantasy football community when it came to DeAndre Swift. And, he was more of a 3rd round pick throughout the offseason. Then right up until the season, his ADP fell. He was dealing with his groin injury. He wasn't even guaranteed to be playing week 1. There was, the potential that this was going to be a full-on committee in Detroit. So I think that kind of spooked a lot of people, and his ADP did fall. But so far this season, he has just been balling out. He is the running back 3 in points per game, averaging 20 PPR points per game, and that's just crazy production. And moving forward, I think there are only like 6 running backs that I would firmly take ahead of DeAndre Swift in PPR formats. That would be Christian McCaffrey if he's healthy, but I think he'll be back in a few weeks. So Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara, Aaron Jones, and Austin Eckler. I really can't say firmly that I would take any other running back ahead of DeAndre Swift at this point. He only has a 64.8% snap share, which isn't workhorse caliber. That's like 12th in the NFL, but it's fine. It's not perfect, but it's still pretty solid. But I actually think that number is going to continue to improve moving forward. The Lions head coach came out and said that we're going to be seeing a lot more of DeAndre Swift and that he's earned some more first down looks. That's exactly what you want to see. If he can kind of keep eating into Jamal Williams' workload, that would be perfect. But the thing that's really been carrying DeAndre Swift this season is his receiving work. He has been great in the receiving game, 23 targets. That's number 2 in the NFL at the running back position, and then 19 receptions. That's also 2nd in the NFL. And he's only behind Najee in those 2 categories. And it's really just because that week 3 game where Najee Harris had like 19 targets and 14 receptions. So that really just pushed Najee to number 1. But I think in terms of season-long production, with McCaffrey missing a few games, it is very possible that DeAndre Swift leads the running back position in targets. He's also number 1 in receiving yards with 166. So I love DeAndre Swift moving forward. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be valuing him as a mid-tier running back 1 for the rest of the year. The next player I'm going to be talking about is Cooper Kupp. He was my wide receiver 15 going into the season, a late 3rd round pick. That's pretty much consensus. In most drafts, he was like a late 3rd, early 4th round selection. And he is actually the number 1 fantasy point scorer so far this season, averaging 30.4 PPR points per game. His chemistry with Matthew Stafford has been great. Going into the season, I think a lot of people had high hopes for both Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. They've both proven that they can be solid fantasy wide receivers, even with them both being very involved. And that was with Jared Goff at quarterback. So now you have a new, pretty top tier quarterback in Matthew Stafford coming in. I think a lot of people expected Kupp and Woods to thrive. But really, I don't know if anyone expected this. Robert Woods has basically been phased out. He's pretty much been a non-factor. He's still getting some targets, but it's not even comparable to Cooper Kupp. Kupp has taken over as the clear alpha in this offense. As you can see by his 30.4 points per game to start off the season. He's been targeted 33 times, which is 2nd in the NFL. He has a 35.5% target share, which is insane. He's leading the NFL with 25 receptions, leading the NFL with 367 receiving yards, and leading the NFL with 5 receiving touchdowns. And I really think he should be valued as a top 5 wide receiver moving forward. Obviously, he's not going to average 30 points per game for the rest of the season. That's definitely unsustainable, but I still think he should be a top 5 guy, maybe even top 3 in all honesty. I think he's right there with guys like Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, and Stephon Diggs. So if you did draft Cooper Kupp, late third, early fourth round pick, I bet you're feeling fantastic. I have him in a few spots, and he's definitely just been carrying those teams the first few weeks of the season. And the third player who's shooting up my rankings is another wide receiver, and it is Mike Williams. I was way off on Mike Williams going into the season. I will totally admit that. I was not buying into the hype. It seems like every year everyone was hyping up Mike Williams. This is going to be the year. And I just wasn't buying it. Why is this year any different from last year? I had him as like a mid 40 wide receiver. He was being drafted as like a mid to late 7th round pick, but that was underdog fantasy football, and that ADP is pretty sharp. He was honestly probably going a few rounds later on some other platforms. So just a massive, massive steal if you drafted Mike Williams. And in the offseason, we had heard the Chargers offensive coordinator come out and say that Mike Williams was going to be used like Michael Thomas. But honestly, I did not buy into that at all. I just thought it was coach speak. The offensive coordinator isn't going to come out and say, oh yeah, we're going to use Mike Williams as a deep threat who gets like 4 or 5 targets a game and is just a red zone guy. Like, he's not going to say that. He's going to want to hype up his player, but that was not coach speak. He 100% meant it. Mike Williams has been the wide receiver 2 through 3 weeks, averaging 25.8 PPR points per game, and his role has just drastically changed from 2020 to 2021. He went from averaging 5.7 targets per game in 2020 with an average target distance of 14.8 to now in 2021, 10.3 targets per game with an average target distance of 8.3. So he used to be that deep threat, getting 5-6 targets a game. Now he's just been a volume machine. Him and Keenan just have a massive target share of this passing offense. And he's also once again shown that he is a red zone threat. He has 8 red zone targets, which is number 2 in the NFL, and that has helped him rack up 4 receiving touchdowns. That's number 2 in the NFL. So honestly, moving forward, I think he is a top 10 wide receiver and should be treated like that. He really has given us nothing to, not think that this is not sustainable. Obviously he's not going to be averaging 26 points per game for the future. He may have some games where he doesn't get into the end zone, but if that volume stays consistent moving forward, Mike Williams truly could be the best overall pick in drafts this year. The next player I'm going to talk about is going to be Brandin Cooks, and I was actually pretty high on Brandin Cooks going into this season. He was my wide receiver 32. I valued him as like a late 6th round pick. He was being drafted more in like the late 8th round range, so I was feeling pretty solid with Brandin Cooks. I definitely didn't think he would be this great to start off the season. There were a lot of concerns with Brandin Cooks coming from the QB situation. Not a lot of people were going to be buying into Tyrod Taylor and this overall offense, and that's a totally viable concern. The thing is, when you're looking at like 6th, 7th, 8th round wide receivers, none of these guys are without their flaws. And so personally, I was confident in Cook's talent. The man puts up 1,000-yard receiving seasons like it's nothing. And I still thought that he was going to have a great target share. He may not have that touchdown upside because the offense is poor, but he can still be getting the ball 8, 9, 10 times a game with his target share. And so far, that is how it's gone. He is the wide receiver 5 in points per game, averaging 20.6 PPR points per game. And he is producing through volume and opportunity, not touchdowns, which I think is something that can give him sustainability going forward. He only has 1 touchdown. I don't think that's something that's going to drastically improve because, like I mentioned, this is a bad offense. They're not going to be scoring a ton, but that volume is really what has been carrying him. He has a 37.6% target share. That's number 1 in the NFL, 45.7% target rate. So in the routes he's running, he's being targeted 45.7% of the time. That is also absurd. That's number 1 in the NFL. 56.2% of the air yard share, also number 1 in the NFL, averaging 10.7 targets a game. That is number 4. So I think Cooks should be valued as a top 20 wide receiver moving forward. His production is going to take a dip going from Tyrod Taylor to Davis Mills. I know he had a really nice week 3 performance, but in that game, he had 67% of Mills' passing yards on Thursday Night Football. That is not something that's going to be sustainable throughout the season, but I still think Brandin Cooks is going to be a very, very solid wide receiver 2 moving forward, and I'm very happy that I have him on a few of my teams. Then the last player I'm going to talk about is going to be Rob Gronkowski, and I was pretty even with consensus here on Gronk coming into the season. Had him as like a mid to high end tight end 2. There are not a lot of people who had Gronk inside their top 12 tight ends. I definitely did not, And so he was being drafted as like a late 12th round pick. And so far to start off the season, he's definitely competing with Mike Williams to be one of the best picks in drafts this year. And I've kind of identified a few factors that are contributing to his fast start in 2021. The first one is just that he is in better football shape. After the 2018 season, Gronk retired. His body just could not handle the pain anymore. He had a ton of injuries after that season. It sounded brutal. So the whole 2019 season, he's retired. He's taken time away from football. Then Brady goes to the Bucs, recruits Gronk, and he's back. And you can't just step onto the field after a year of not playing and just gel in right away. And he didn't. He definitely had his struggles, kind of a slow start, but he eventually started to pick it up, and he definitely had some great performances towards the end of the year. So having a full year of playing, behind you going into 2021 definitely probably made him feel a lot better this season. And the second factor is just that the Bucs totally abandoned their tight end committee they had going last season. The first few weeks of the season, you saw O.J. Howard, you saw Cam Brate, and obviously Gronk. All three of those guys were very involved. And then when O.J. Howard went down with his Achilles injury, it was still a pretty solid committee between Gronk and Cam Brate. Not this year. Gronk is the clear number one tight end on this team. He saw an 88% snap share in week 1, then an 81% snap share in week 2. The snap share dipped in week 3 to 62%, but that was because he got injured during the game, had to go to the locker room. So obviously he missed some snaps there, but his usage has been fantastic to start off the season, and that has led to him being the tight end 2 in points per game so far, 19.5 PPR points per game. And I'm just going to run through all these stats that have kind of contributed to this. So he's number 4 in targets at the tight end position. All of this is for tight ends. So number 4 in targets, number 2 in air yards, number 2 in average depth of target, number 2 in deep targets, number 2 in red zone targets, number 1 in total touchdowns, and number 2 in target quality rating. So basically, he's involved in all the big time plays. He's getting those deep targets, getting those red zone looks, and he's also getting the volume overall with those targets. So just a lot of really positive signs from Rob Gronkowski. And I think he should be valued as a top 5 tight end moving forward. I'd be taking Kelsey, Waller, Kittle, and probably TJ Hawkinson over him. And then you have kind of Gronk, Mark Andrews, both sitting there at tight end 5 and tight end 6. I really think that's where he's going to be for the rest of the season, as long as he can stay healthy. If you were drafting him like 12th round, you're just looking so pretty because you probably already drafted a solid tight end ahead of him, or you were kind of just taking a late round flyer, were able to maximize your value at other positions, and then you kind of just walk into Gronk, who's turned into like a really nice option at the position. So those are really the 5 players who are shooting up my rankings so far this season. If you guys enjoyed this video, please just hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you want to see another video similar to this, tomorrow I'm going to be posting 5 players falling in my rankings, so players who have drastically underperformed their ADP. So go look out for that. But that's all I have for today. Thank you guys for stopping by, and I'll see you next time.